almost any religion actually. And this is difficult because it's like, you can't be a scholar about other things. But look, really, wouldn't you want, if somebody's going to explore Christianity and try to understand it, wouldn't you want them to talk to both, read the Bible themselves and try to understand it on its own terms, and talk to knowledgeable Christians when they have questions or they think there's an apparent contradiction and stuff, and not just Google it and go to skeptical websites? Okay? Let's do the same thing. Talk to knowledgeable, not your neighbor who may not know much. Okay, maybe your neighbor does, but a lot of Muslims know a lot. The average Muslim knows quite a bit. Compared to the average Christian about Christianity, the average Muslim knows way more about Islam than the Christians know about Christianity, unfortunately. 3, we aim to persuade by reasoning scripturally. So I already talked about persuading, and we reason scripturally. So we're drawing our points primarily from the scriptures. We are not appealing to things outside of it. We're not trying to argue philosophically, logically, like appealing to some abstract idea that's independent of the Bible and the Qur'an. Okay? You may be able to do that with other systems, but not with Islam. Islam is a text-based religion, as is Christianity. So to refute Christianity, hypothetically, what do you got to do? Refute the Bible. Okay? You can't just appeal to something philosophically, really. Okay? 4, we aim to persuade Muslims, not persuade Christians. I'm just going to be a bit blunt. I don't really care what you think. Okay? I care what they think. To reach them, if I impressed you with lots of things in the room and then I went and I used it on Muslims and that doesn't make any headway, what is the point? Okay? I'm going to say that is essentially what you will learn with other things. This is the problem. The stuff that Christians have been learning from other Christians isn't actually persuasive to Muslims. So, I don't want to just be pragmatic, but I'm going to evaluate what am I going to use, what's useful. It's got to be true, it's got to be logically valid, but it's also got to be actually practically persuasive. So that's going to be a subset of what's true and valid, is also what's persuasive. If it's true and valid but not persuasive, I don't want to use it. So let's say 99% of the 100 points that I could make, arguments I could use, are practically not persuasive to Muslims. I will throw out the 99%. 5, before we share the gospel, hear this. We want to share the gospel. There are people who have met Alex and myself along the way, and they have this impression like we're not trying to share the gospel because we refuse to share the gospel until the very end. Okay? The gospel is the very, very last thing we want to share we want to get there, but we want to get there. We can't start there. If you start there, you have basically ruined your opportunity with the Muslim. And that's not your fault. It's the way that Islam was designed. Okay? They would love for you to talk about Jesus and him dying on the cross and the Trinity and the New Testament. Anything New Testament, please, the Muslim will want you to talk about it because they will just assault everything that you will bring to them. And that, I'm sure, was your experience if you talk to anybody that's a Muslim. So don't do that. Well, that's why, like I said, Old Testament. We will not talk about the New Testament or Jesus or the Trinity or the cross with a Muslim until we've dismantled the Qur'an and relaid Old Testament foundations. Those 2 stages must be done before, and in that order, before we will get to the gospel. So that's the main big picture you have to get in your head. Never share the gospel with a Muslim before you have relayed the Old Testament foundations. And never do that until you've dismantled the Quran. Okay, so the main thing that we need to do is dismantle the Quran. Okay, what is the Quran and what is Islam? Where does it come from? Well, this is our thesis, okay, and I firmly believe it now is true. Okay, and I I don't have time to elaborate all into it right now. I have lots of evidences. I could show it to you. But I'll just give you a little bit of explanation. Number 6 here. So we've identified Islam as a heretical offshoot from rabbinical Judaism. Okay. Rabbinical Judaism. Now, this is you know what the big problem is? Christians don't know what Judaism is. Christians have this idea that Judaism refers to the religion of the Jews who believe in the Old Testament minus Jesus. Okay, that's their summary. That is not what Judaism is. Judaism does, I'm going to say it, put a little bit more controversial. Judaism does not follow the Old Testament. Okay? They claim to believe in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the Torah, is everything to them, except it's not practically because they follow the oral Torah, not the written Torah primarily. They believe in 2 Torahs. That at Mount Sinai, Moses was given 2 Torahs. The written Torah, that's your Pentateuch, and the oral Torah. What is the oral Torah that God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai? All of the rabbinical teachings and practices and rules that will ever be taught in history were given to Moses and passed down orally. So when the rabbis teach from their traditions, God revealed that to Moses and it was passed down. Really? You know why Jesus had a big issue with the Pharisees? Because of the oral Torah. Okay? The Pharisees, rabbinic, I don't like calling it Judaism. It's because Judaism is misleading. It is rabbinical Judaism. And that's not a slur or anything. This is what religious scholars, Jewish scholars, will also describe Judaism as rabbinical Judaism, because different forms of Judaism at different time periods and so on. But rabbinical Judaism is the Judaism of the rabbis. The rabbis are the Pharisees. Okay, so you need to grasp, rabbinical Judaism is Pharisaical Judaism. Okay, now you all know from the gospel accounts, the Pharisees emphasize lots of extra rules and so on that are not in the Torah or the Tanakh. Okay, and Jesus took issue with them, Matthew 15 and so on. Okay, so they were following all these other, that's where it's coming from. The Sadducees didn't follow that. They rejected the oral Torah. They were the priests, but they also rejected certain Orthodox doctrine like angels and resurrection and so on. So we don't follow them either. We follow what we could call Messianic Judaism. Christianity is Messianic Judaism. Okay, it's the Judaism that follows the Messiah, who is the fulfillment of the Hebrew Scriptures. We are following Old Testament Judaism. Okay, fulfilled in the Messiah. Okay, accepting also the New Covenant Scriptures that come with him. So the New Covenant Scriptures, the New Testament Scriptures, are the fulfillment and continuation of the Old Testament. That is what really is in line with the Torah. I'm going to say the rabbinical Jews, which is the Pharisees, that sect of Judaism from the 1st century, is the only other sect other than Christianity or Messianic Judaism that survived the 1st century. Okay, so modern we call Judaism. We mean the religion of Judaism other than Christianity or Messianic Judaism. That's Pharisaism. Okay, rabbinical Judaism, the Judaism of the rabbis. So what are we saying? Islam is a heretical offshoot of rabbinical Judaism. It is not, as many Christians have said, and Western Islamic scholars who are not Muslims, critical scholars, many of them say, Islam started out of a heretical offshoot of Christianity. Because why? The Qur'an mentions Jesus. Okay? Well, that is not the focus in the Qur'an. And this is perfectly, what the Qur'an says about Jesus is perfectly compatible with an offshoot of rabbinical Judaism. Because Jesus is not the Son of God. He's not God. Don't say the Jews had him killed on the cross, the Quran says. Okay, it was made to appear that way, which, by the way, that verse can be interpreted differently. Not just that he wasn't crucified. It could mean that he was crucified, but don't say that the Jews did it. Okay, that's another way of understanding it, I think is actually correct. The focus of the Quran is not Jesus. Most of the Quran is about, do you know who the biggest, the most mentioned Old Testament, biblical figure is in the Quran?
Like Moses or Muhammad?
Moses. Do you know who the second one is?
Muhammad?
No, Muhammad's only mentioned 4 times by name. Abraham. You know who the third is?
Oh, Ishmael?
Ismail.
Joseph or Jacob?
Good guesses, but Noah. Okay? And Jesus is somewhere after that. The top 3 in order are Moses, then Abraham, then Noah. Now, if you take the top 2, a scripture that is obsessively talking about Moses and Abraham, what does it sound like? Judaism. Third is Noah. Why would Noah be so high? Because the Arab followers of Muhammad are primarily Gentile, not Jewish. In rabbinical Judaism, they teach about a concept called the Noahide laws. Okay, these are 7 commandments that God gave to Noah for all of humanity. Now, of course, there's not 7 commandments, right? In Genesis 9. Because the rabbis just make stuff up and they add it in. They don't put it in the Bible, but they put it in the Oral Torah. The Oral Torah is now written in many forms, in the Talmuds and the Mishnah and the Midrashic literature and so on. Okay, lots of sea of literature, of the rabbinic literature. Okay, that is all Oral Torah. And so the 7 commandments of the Noahide laws, okay, exactly look like Islam. Because Islam is a Gentile religion. It's not a ethnically Jewish religion. It is a universal religion that is supposed to be the religion ultimately. Who would be the first prophet in Islam? Do you guys know?
Is it Muhammad?
Who would they consider their first prophet?
Moses.
Oh,
Abraham.
Who said Adam? There you go, you got it. Okay, Adam is the first prophet. Is Adam a prophet? Well, the Jews say he is. The rabbis say he is. So does the Quran. Is Noah a prophet? Biblically? The rabbis say he is. The Quran says he is. Okay, interesting. They share the same people as prophets that are not regarded as prophets in the Torah. Who's following the Torah? Okay, not the rabbis. Neither is Muhammad and the Quran. The Quran and Muhammad are following the rabbis, who are not really following the Torah. That's what I want you to grasp. Okay? So, in our approach, we need to understand what Islam is. It is not a heretical offshoot of Christianity, a form of Nestorianism or something, okay? The focus of Islam, the Islamic teaching, Islamic theology, in fact, teaches almost exactly the same things on so many issues as rabbinical Judaism. You know, there's no theophanies, the God coming in physical forms and appearing in rabbinical Judaism. Okay, the Old Testament, does God ever appear in any form? Okay, but the Jews don't believe that. Are they following the Old Testament? How could you not believe that? Well, because they're following the Oral Torah, which reframes all those stories. Okay? Which retells stories and adds backstories to all the stories in the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, and by that it reinterprets everything and reframes it all. Yeah.
Sorry, that kind of went over my head. So,
Yeah.
God coming down in form like God as fire or the cloud.
Yeah, the pillar, fire, cloud, or God walking in the garden, or God coming as one of the 3 men that visited Abraham in Genesis 18.
They don't believe any of that? They don't believe that happened, or?
They don't believe that God literally did any of that.
Okay.
Okay, they have a different way of reading all of that. But it's like certain examples, you're going to say, well, then you really cannot take it a different way.
Yeah.
Right? Like he appears as a man, as one of the 3 in Genesis 18, very specifically. Okay? Or he comes in an angelic form in the burning bush. Or it says in Exodus 34 that Yahweh came and stood on Mount Sinai. Also 1 Samuel 3, when he's calling to Samuel at night when he's young, it says that the word stood calling him. Okay? So, I mean, you can't take that really a different way. It is physically present in some form, and certain forms is human form also. So the rabbis don't allow for theophanies because their theology doesn't allow that God, who is other and majestic, would come into a finite form into the created order. Who else does that sound like? Muslims. Okay, it's the same theology. Original sin. That we are corrupted as a result of Adam's sin. And now you have an inclination to sin as a result of it. Okay, did you know that rabbinical Jews don't believe that? And neither does Islam. Islam teaches that there is no fallen condition of humanity. You were born not only pure, it's called the doctrine of fitra, but you're not inclined to sin, there's no inclination, okay? The problem is culture and environment, okay, why people don't follow. Or blood atonement. You know that religious Jews today, they're not really vying for a temple, and they really need, because they need to build it and sacrifice, right? For Christians, Christians are typically confused about this. They think religious Jews, like, they need blood sacrifices, because the Bible says it, right? Okay, but they're not in some urgency trying to think like, I guess we're not right with God, we need to be doing blood sacrifices. No, because rabbinical Judaism says you don't need blood sacrifices. Okay? All you need to do is sincerely repent. That's the main thing. Okay? Strive to obey his laws. You're not going to do it perfectly. You don't need to. Because God will be merciful. Because God is so merciful, you can trust in his mercy as long as you just sincerely try to follow him, and God will accept you without payment. What does that sound like? Islam. That's Judaism and Islam. It's all the same. Okay? So we're going to come and we're going to present the gospel. God came down incarnate. Okay? And he died on your behalf to deal with the effects of original sin and your personal sin so that he can make payment as a substitution on your behalf because you know blood needs to be shed. Okay? The whole gospel is impossible to share because the foundations are distorted. And they're distorted first in rabbinical Judaism, and they are inherited in the Qur'an because it comes from that origin. So are you going to talk about the gospel and Jesus first? When you're going to talk to a religious Jew, you're going to start with the New Testament? Where are you going to start? Old Testament. Although we're going to develop a strategy for them next related to this. First we got to dismantle the oral Torah. Okay? Then we're going to use the Old Testament to dismantle it. Okay? But we got to deal with their sources and continue to use the Hebrew Bible to relay the foundations after we dismantle the oral Torah, and then we can go to the gospel, right? That's the logical way of dealing with it. So that's the way we're going to approach Islam. We got to dismantle the Quran first, which is essentially their oral Torah, okay, so to speak. Then we're going to keep using the Torah, which we're going to use as the way to dismantle the Quran. We're going to keep using it to relay and clarify the true foundations. Original sin, blood atonement, theophanies. We're going to share about the suffering servant in Isaiah 53. Then we're going to finally go to the gospel. Okay? But once we've done that, the gospel is easy at that point. Yeah, you want to ask a question, Darcy?
I want to make sure we're not thinking that we should be telling Muslims that the Quran is an offshoot of rabbinical Judaism. It's good for us to know, but if you bring that up to a Muslim, that's going to shoot your conversation.
Well, we will, but we're going to get there.
You get there, but
not at the beginning.
It certainly wouldn't make that a casual conversation point.
Okay, but once you go through what we go,
Well, you gotta go through what you're going
Yes.
through first.
yeah,
right?
because at the end they're gonna be like, okay, so then what are you saying the Quran is? Okay, I'll tell you.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying, like,
Yeah,
until
not at
you've
the
gone
beginning.
through this process, you can't have that
Yes,
conversation.
right.
I just wanna make sure we are
Yeah,
aware of that.
absolutely. But this is for us to understand where we're going, okay? Because we got lots of points and things that you got to learn to dismantle, okay? But you need to know how we're orienting ourselves, where we're going, and everything, okay? Where are we? Number 7. We focus only on what the Quran says about the Torah, not New Testament or Christian theology. Do I need to explain it more? I don't think so. Number 8. We focus only on comparing parallel narratives in the Quran and in the Old Testament or Torah. We only talk about, key thing, we only talk about narratives, and we only talk about what is parallel. If it's, okay, my Quran and my Hebrew Bible, okay? So if it's in the Quran and it's in the Hebrew Bible, meaning that it's the same story, it's in both, that's what we can talk about, nothing else. So now we can set them side by side and look at it and compare. Okay? Anything else that's not parallel, we can't really talk about, because how are we going to establish it? Okay? Bible says that, well, who cares? Quran also says it. Oh, okay. So this is the stuff we can talk about. And the next point, related, number 9, we focus on details, not doctrine. I want to let that phrase sink into your head. Details, not doctrine. Okay? We do not talk about theology with Muslims until we've dismantled the Quran. Because where do you get your theology from? Bible. Okay? Old and New Testament. Where do they get theirs from? Quran and their sources. So you're going to debate, let's say, theophany. Can God become a man? This is the question that many Christians pose. It's not the right question. Because how are you going to answer that? Well, no, he can't, Quran says. Oh no, but how can you say it limits God? Quran says. Okay? That's the stopper. Doesn't matter what you say. God already spoke. Or did he? That's the question, right? Did he speak in the Quran or did he not? That's what we have to come back to. Same thing with the Bible. Did he speak through the Bible or not? Question is, which book is from God, right? Because we debate about doctrine and theology or ethics or philosophical things. Like ultimately what we believe and how we live our lives is derived from divine authority, what God has revealed. Okay, that's what we both believe as Muslims and Christians. We're just following different books. So if we're going to debate about the teachings of the books without debating the book, how are we going to get anywhere? We're just going to argue back and forth and make no progress either way, actually. So the root issue is which book is from God. And that actually, if anybody's had real experience with talking to any Muslim, you know that's what it comes back to. The Bible was corrupted. Thank you. Okay. So we don't talk about doctrine or theology. We want you to get that in your head. We derive that from our text. They derive it from theirs. So anything we're just deriving, we can make no headway without dealing with the text first. Okay. And I should say this too. What do Muslims always say about the Quran? It is perfectly preserved. I'll just say amen. Okay? I love that. So what this is very counterintuitive for Christians, especially if you've learned any other apologetics. What do Christians focus on all the wrong things? They want to critique, there's textual variants for the Quran. Of course there are textual variants. Do they amount to much of anything? No. Like almost nothing. Okay? We got bigger issues in textual criticism and for the biblical manuscripts than the Quranic ones. Okay? Do I think we can, of course we can reconstruct it. We've got good manuscripts and so on, but let's not use double standards, right? Now, Christians are going to say, well, the Muslims say there's no variance. Okay, well, fine. Imagine you convince them there's variance. Are they going to leave Islam? No. What are they going to say? Oh, like you guys, doesn't affect doctrine or anything, right? And just because a physical copy over there has a slight difference in a word or whatever, doesn't change anything. We know what it is, right? I don't want to just move them up a notch. I want them to leave Islam, right? So imagine wasting all of your time trying to argue about something that's only going to move them up a notch and like refine their theology. Okay, I don't want to be an internal, let's debate which theology within Islam. Okay, let's just cut it out from its foundations, right? So I like to say that's amazing, and actually I think it's been really well preserved. Okay, fine. I'm going to say I don't think it's I think there's textual variance, but none of it really matters. This is what I'll say, that none of it really matters. It doesn't amount to much of anything. Okay, so I think it's been so well preserved. Yeah, absolutely. Because what's amazing is that because it's been so well preserved, we know what the contents are. And it's the contents that are the problem, not the manuscripts. Okay? If the manuscripts were not reliable, then I might be unsure what was originally in the Qur'an. Now I got a problem. Okay? I got a better situation when I know what's actually there. It was given originally. Now I can critique it. Okay? So I say, I won't say it to them usually like this, but, unless maybe they're being difficult with me or something, which is usually not the case. Okay, but to Christians, I'll say the Quran is a perfectly preserved corrupt book. Because the corrupt aspect is the contents, it's not the text. Okay? Okay, so big picture. First, we deconstruct Islam's real 5 pillars. Second, we reconstruct 5 biblical pillars. 4 of those are the Old Testament foundations, and the last pillar of all is the gospel. Okay? So the 5 pillars of Islam, you should all know what those are anyway, but we're not going to talk about those 5 pillars. We're going to talk about the real 5 pillars. What are the real 5 pillars? Where they're the issues that we're going to address. We're going to say these are the things that at the root, this is what really defines Islam that need to be addressed for us to break through. Okay? So we're going to take 5, essentially, we're going to say statements that represent what they believe. Every Muslim, okay? Doesn't matter their sect. And then we're going to dismantle each pillar. So the essence of our approach, we called it the master key. The idea is we're unlocking any door so we can break through to any Muslim. And we're going to address the foundational aspect of our approach. The master key is the 5 pillars, where we dismantle them when we relay 5. Okay? So deconstruction, then reconstruction. Now, I want you to understand, we're going to go through the 5, but there are many, many, many other points we can add on. Okay? In fact, you will never learn it all. There's so much to look at, because it's all rooted in the narrative comparisons, the stories that we compare. There's so much to compare. Okay? So I'm doing more in-depth research on all of that and developing resources if you want to go further. We know where we would add on. If we're going to add on. Essentially, I don't have this in my PowerPoint today, but Alex often uses an analogy of if you're going to, shoot a rocket from the ground into space, or a satellite into space, what is a lot of the mass of the rocket got to be? Fuel. Why do you need a lot of fuel? You got to fight gravity. Okay? So the influence of the Quran in Islam on a Muslim is like the gravity. You need a lot of fuel to resist the pull of the Quran in Islam to get out of the grip of gravity, out of the atmosphere, to then be free. Okay? Essentially, what we are doing is in the dismantling or deconstruction process, that is the arguments and points we're making is the fuel to resist the pull of Islam on the Muslim, and eventually to get out of the atmosphere is when we are then relaying the 5 real pillars for the Bible. Okay, then we have no resistance. Okay, we want to get to a point where there's no resistance, and it's amazing when you get to that point. Because imagine talking to a Muslim and they actually don't resist. It's very unusual comparatively. So what are the real 5 pillars? These are the statements we're going to deconstruct. First, the Bible. Now, because we are going to focus on which part of the Bible, Old Testament or Torah, okay? They say the Bible's corrupted. Well, Torah is corrupted, because that's what we're going to talk about. Okay. Now, Bible, I should say this. Muslims, when they use the word Bible, we don't use the word Bible with a Muslim. Because for a Muslim, they think that Bible means New Testament. Or more accurately, the Christian scriptures. They don't even know what the New Testament is, the vast majority of them. They just think scriptures that the Christians follow. The Christians, this is the way they would say it. The Christians follow the Bible. The Jews don't follow the Bible. They follow the Torah. I'm like, okay, but the Torah is part of the Bible. We also follow the Torah. We both believe the Bible. They just don't have the New Testament. Okay? They don't know what they're talking about. Okay? So, but you use Bible, that signals for them the the Christian books that are not Old Testament. Because they don't think that Christians believe the Old Testament. By the way, this is also the Christians' fault. How many Christians really believe the Old Testament? And are following it and know it and will defend it? What do Christians always do? They only talk about the New Testament with anybody. We need to get past that, okay? Old Testament is the key. So the Torah was corrupted, they claim. Secondly, they claim God authored both the Qur'an and the Torah. So both of these are from God, is the claim. 3, Abraham and Ishmael traveled to Mecca and built the Kaaba. Now, this is the one you probably didn't even know. Okay? And this is actually the most important one. And because Christians don't know it, they don't know what they're to focus on. This is the most distinctive thing out of all the pillars, this one. This is the most important one. I should emphasize this. I find an experience when I teach other Christians this approach, they keep getting stuck on the first pillar. All they want to talk about is establishing the Torah. But we're going to do that. But this is we're going to say kind of the least important is the first pillar. The most important is the third pillar. Okay, so you need to get in your head, we need to get into the stories, we need to get past the first point where we're going to establish the Torah. But every point we have so many things to say, okay? We just don't have all the time in the world with them. Okay, so what's the significance of 3? What direction do Muslims face to pray? What are they facing toward? Mecca, the Kaaba, in Mecca. What is the Kaaba? It is that cube-shaped thing. Let me try again.
That's right there.
Okay, so this is a prayer mat that was given to me by a Muslim when Alex and I were at that convention, and we went to a dawah table. Dawah is like the word for evangelism in Islam. It means to call to Islam, dawah. Okay, so we were at a dawah table, and they were giving us stuff, and the guy's like, he gave me a kufi, one of the hats. That's kind of like a kippah a bit, which is kind of funny, a little bit. All right, but also the prayer mat. Okay, what's on it? It tells you the direction. You to face the Kaaba. The Kaaba's pictured there on it. Okay. He said, I said, look, I'm not a Muslim. He said, no, take it. I believe. Like you'll use it one day. Okay. You know what? And I actually like that because he really wants me to believe. He cares about me. You have to look at them with grace. Okay? They are very passionate and zealous and often devout and disciplined and put most Christians to shame. Okay, but unfortunately they're following the wrong thing, and that's really sad. Okay, so we got to look at them with a different way than some Christians are doing. So the point about the Kaaba is the most important point, because what is the Kaaba, let's say theologically for Muslims? It's the first temple. Okay? This is the best way to put it. The first temple. Before the first temple, built by Solomon, was the real first temple, built by Abraham and Ishmael in Mecca. God established the first way how to worship him rightly by Abraham and Ishmael with the Kaaba. Yeah.
Never mind.
Did you want to ask a question?
No.
Okay, that's good. All right, yeah, so that's their claim, obviously, right? I don't agree with it. But that means that defines everything about religion. That's where everything is focused. You know, for Christians, we kind of think, think about the Old Testament. Okay, like God requires blood sacrifices, all sorts of things. Okay, yeah. When I finish explaining these 5 points, we'll take a break. Yeah, so when we think of the Old Testament, there's a lot of things that are required that you probably would think, oh, I don't really like, I wouldn't want to have to do that. I don't really like that. You know, guess what? God doesn't really care what you like. That's exactly their attitude. And they're right to think that way. The problem is God didn't institute that. Right? So they say, well, the 5 prayers, which is actually really not, the best way to think of the 5 prayers is not actually prayers, it's worship. Because it's a prescribed way to worship. You got to do these actions, you got to say these things. And for all the evangelicals, like myself, all think, oh, well, it's so ritual and so impersonal. But did God say it? Did God establish it? If he did, it doesn't really matter what you think. Okay? So for when evangelicals make these points with Muslims, it actually sounds really selfish and arrogant that you would say that you know better than God. So the question is, how can we break through to show them they didn't build the Kaaba? Because if it wasn't built by Abraham and Ishmael, God didn't establish it. It was built by pagans. Number 4, Ishmael, this is the thing that unfortunately, so many Christians believe this. Ishmael was the father of the Arabs. Come on, he was not. Not according to the Torah, and we'll show you that. Okay, Ishmael was not the father of the Arabs. They claim he is the father of the Arabs, specifically that he's the father of the Arabs in the Hijaz, which is the region where Mecca is, and specifically the tribes that were in Mecca, that Muhammad descended from. So the key issue for them for number 4 is that Muhammad is an Ishmaelite. He needs to be an Ishmaelite to be a descendant of Abraham, because he's not a descendant of Isaac and Jacob. This is according to them, like I know historically, but according to them too, they would say this. He's not from Isaac and Jacob, so he's got to be from Ishmael. If he's not from either, he's not a prophet. Because the Qur'an says that prophethood was given to Abraham and his descendants. So he won't qualify for prophethood if he's not an Ishmaelite. Number 5, Muhammad received his revelation pattern after the same way as Moses received his revelation. Meaning, and not just Moses, but Moses in particular, but in general, Muhammad follows in the pattern of the previous prophets. He received revelation like them. His ministry of prophethood was just like them. He looks just like them. And that's why we know he's a prophet. Because his life followed the same pattern as theirs in their ministry. They were rejected by the leaders of their people, persecuted, often migrated, and then ultimately were vindicated. And in particular, Moses and the way that he received his revelation. Okay, and that's that at that point they don't really know as a pillar, but as a pillar. Okay, that's the last one. So we're going to keep it there. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We're going to come back, and thank you guys for your attention.